Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
For decades, the Nehru family bestrode India like a colossus. The founder of the dynasty led the independence struggle, and then his daughter, Mrs. Gandhi, piloted the country through many troubled waters, mainly clinging to Nehru's policy of non-alignment, suspicion of US hegemony, and an aversion to neoliberalism. She succumbed to an assassin, as in turn did her successor and son, Rajiv Gandhi.
Over the last few years, Rajiv's widow, Italian-born Sonia, has been the power behind the throne as their party, Congress, has done more U-turns than their sister party, New Labour, here in Britain. Out went the old, and in came the new Congress, embracing new liberal economics and aligning mainly with the US. In the process, they appear to have burned large parts of their once vast and poor electoral base. Just about all they have left is that they are a secular option, standing weakly against the tide of Hindu nationalism.
And just like New Labour paved the way for the return of the Conservatives, so it seems new Congress has paved the way to the possible re-emergence of a very powerful adversary, Narendra Modi, with real dangers to the very unity of the country. To help us understand the alphabet soup, which is the Indian election, we've invited prominent British political activist and civil rights campaigner, himself of Indian background, Suresh Grover. And I'm glad to say he joins us now on the Sputnik. Suresh, welcome. For the uninitiated, which I'm afraid partly includes me, paint a picture, would you, of the main runners and riders in this Indian election?
Well, the main runners would be obviously the Indian National Congress, which is led by Sonia Gandhi and her son Rahul Gandhi. Then you have the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is a Hindu nationalist party, and its prime ministerial candidate is Narendra Modi. And then you have Arvind Kejriwal, who is the latest addition to a very powerful force in India against corruption, against communal disharmony, and against crony capitalism, which is what the manifesto says, who's part of the Aam Aadmi Party known as AAP. And then you have regional figures who've been stalwarts for a long time. For example, Mamata Banerjee from West Bengal, who broke away from Congress some time ago. Then you have people like Nitish Kumar from Bihar. You have Jayalalitha, who was an actress before in Tamil Nadu, who actually, in terms of power blocks, in terms of building alliances with these two parties, are very, very forceful. Indian elections for some time haven't had a majority of either the two main political parties, BJP or the Indian National Congress. So the magical figure for them is 272 seats out of 543. The last election saw Indian National Congress get 206 seats and the BJP around 118. So they have to build a national alliance or different forms of alliances. So currently, the Congress party has the United Progressive Alliance, the UPA, and the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is in opposition, is called the National Democratic Alliance. So it is a political framework which has to link up with other political parties. And in that are political parties who will never join with the BJP, like the Communist Party, the United Left Blocs, either the Communist Party of India, the Communist Party Marxist.
I was going to ask you about them, because the Communist Party of Marxist were once a powerful force. I mean, they ran West Bengal, didn't they?
For 36 years, and Mamata Banerjee broke that in the last election.
Now, the bloc of which Congress is the principal bloc, building bloc, as the name suggests, used to be the progressive or centre-left part of politics. But in my introduction, you'll have heard my thesis that actually Congress has lost its way, is no longer really deserving of the title left. Am I right in that?
Absolutely, it's followed neoliberal policies. It created an industrial bastion which favored industrialists over poor people and cut wages. It increased gas prices. It increased prices of raw materials and foods like onions, which has shifted political parties away from Congress Party because of the dissent of ordinary people. And it's also extremely corrupt. There are three difficulties at the moment in India. The first is the issue of corruption. Who really will tackle it seriously? The second is who will tackle crony capitalism, as it's known in India? Who will actually stand against the big power blocks, the Tatas, the Birlas, the financial power blocks, the Tatas, the Birlas, the Ambanis, the Mithals. And what's happened in Gujarat, this is where Modi comes in. Yeah. He's given free access to these big industrialists to situate their houses in Gujarat.
He's made it a free market paradise, hasn't he?
It's like a new free trade zones, as we used to know them. Yeah. And that's had an adverse effect on both environmental law and labor laws. And the gap between the rich and the poor has increased, not just in Gujarat, but actually over the last, despite the economic growth of 8%, massively in India over the last year. So the economic framework and how you tackle that and how you go into the rural areas is going to be very, very crucial. The third factor, which I think nobody's talking about, but I believe it to be a very serious factor, is that out of the 810 million people who are eligible to vote, we're talking about a massive number of people. Out of 1.2 billion, there's 810 million who will vote. 100 million are new voters. Now, the Indian population, about 65% of them are below 35 years of age. 50% of them are between 18 and 23. Now, they started mobilizing on the streets against rapes, for example, and violence against women, against corruption. Now, where will they go? Who's going to take their votes?
Well, on that kind of subject, when I mentioned the word Gujarat here in this country, in my own area in Bradford, for example, it means only one thing. It means intercommunal violence and slaughter. Now, Modi was the chief minister who was in power when a massacre of Muslims in Gujarat took place. Does that suggest that the Muslims will be throwing their weight almost universally behind Mr. Gandhi and Congress?
Not necessarily with Congress, but with other political parties. They have their own Samaj party in Gujarat. But what Modi is trying to say is that he can win over Muslim votes. Now, I represent the Daud family who live in Batley, very near to Bradford, and they were the British tourists who were killed during the genocide in 2002. And we've taken action against Modi on crimes against humanity, and I served a writ on him in Gujarat in 2004. Now, that genocide is one of the most polarizing, brutal acts of violence that has ever taken place in that subcontinent, which has experienced fasticide, not even genocide. I mean, the partition, which I'm a product of, saw 3 million people die in a period of three months or so. So in Gujarat, Modi being the chief minister, as you know, it developed as a result of a burning of the Hindu Seva Saks in Godhra. 57 people died. Modi being the chief minister abdicated his responsibility, threw away the Constitution of India, called a bandh, which is a strike where the law enforcement agencies became paralyzed, whipped up anger against Muslim community and large, blamed the burning of the train on the ICI in Pakistan when he had no evidence, and then sought revenge by putting police officers in police stations so they could monitor where the massacres were taking place and would not respond. A Congress member of Parliament, Efren Jaffrey, according to his daughter and his servants, rang Modi when he was being killed. A slaughter took place about him and his family. 57 people died, and Modi refused to help. As a result, 2,000 Muslims, these are official figures, there are bound to be more, were massacred. 100,000 were displaced, and about 80% of Muslim businesses were targeted in around Ahmedabad, the capital of Gujarat. So where would Muslim voters go? Certainly not with Modi, in my view. You know, Modi is a lifetime member of the RSS. He was born into it. He's been a servant.
Hindu extremist.
It's a militaristic wing, and its political wing is the BJP. It's a secretive, male-dominated, militaristic army of 1 million people.
And this is the milieu from which he comes. Just time for one last question. Dynastic, nepotistic policies. Nehru was one thing. Mrs. Gandhi also was another. But now we're into, what's that, 4 generations now. And it would be wrong to say that each generation is better than the last. Is this the end for the Nehru-Gandhi family if Rahul loses this one?
Not really. The reason for that is I think Rahul doesn't want to stand. And this is going to be very important. Yes, of course, the Congress has no other central figures apart from the Gandhis, and that's deliberately done to create and harness that dynastic wing. And everybody in the Congress party, not independent commentators, but they'd rather have Priyanka, the daughter of Sonia Gandhi, the sister of Rahul, leading the party. She's more charismatic. She's brighter than him. It's not the end because the results are not predictable. I know there's a wave that's saying Modi will definitely win, but they only have 116 seats at the moment, and for them to get 272 creates a massive increase in percentages of votes. And I think it really depends on who's good at horse trading in terms of alliances, etc. If anybody wants to go with the BJP, they'll never get being a prime minister, for example, because Modi wants to be the prime minister. With Congress, it's likely they'll accept somebody else from a prime minister. I think the dynasty isn't going to go. I think it will only go if the grassroots, ordinary people begin to have a momentum. And it'd be interesting to see where AAP goes at this election. From Delhi to a national party is going to be a massive qualitative leap. The only national party is Congress. BJP only has real power in 5 states out of 30 odd. So who creates that national picture is going to be important. So
will you come back and talk to us after the results?
Absolutely, with pleasure.
It'd be fantastic. Suresh Grover, thanks very much. Coming up after the break, as a wave of Islamophobia accompanies the run-up to elections here in Britain, we'll be talking to one of the British Muslim community's brightest stars. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Sputnik. In the nearby London borough of Tower Hamlets, the independent mayor, Lutfur Rahman, is embroiled in a bitter re-election campaign under state-sponsored fire from the BBC to the communities and local government minister. The former commander of the anti-terrorism police has been sent in by the British Prime Minister to investigate the election of school governors in the Midlands, in which Muslims are alleged to be organising to get Muslim parents involved in running their children's schools. Wow.
And then, just across the river from us, now from the pulpit of Bloomberg's, last week Tony Blair finally went absolutely berserk, declaring war, permanent war that is, of the Orwellian 1984 variety on Muslims worldwide. Anyone would think there was an election coming up.
Indeed. Joining us now to take the temperature in the British culture wars is Inayat Bungawala, always my first port of call on matters pertaining to the British Muslim community. Inayat, welcome. Let's start with the most serious of these 3 examples we gave of this new wave that we seem to be in the middle of. The speech at Bloomberg's by Tony Blair even startled most mainstream commentators. Such was its Manichaean, apocalyptic vision. How did it play to you?
Well, let's take some context to this speech. I mean, Tony Blair, our former Prime Minister, is a man whose reputation worldwide is now in shreds following the Iraq War. He's widely believed to have misled the British public and Parliament over the reasons for war. He led us to war on a false prospectus. This is now established opinion in Britain. And he's expected to come under very heavy criticism in the forthcoming Chilcot report. So he's a man whose reputation is already in tatters. And this is now him trying to regain some credence amongst the public by engaging in what is always a hobby which will get you some votes in Britain, which is bashing Islam and bashing Muslims, by scaremongering about the faith of Islam and the faith of millions of believers worldwide. It's interesting to point out that just a decade ago, 11, 12 years ago, during the run-up to war in Iraq, Tony Blair and other neocon commentators were making the argument that they had to intervene in Iraq to establish democracy, to promote freedoms. And now, just last week, Tony Blair very openly, very unashamedly, was arguing in favour of the overthrow of the Egyptian government, which was democratically elected, whose President Morsi was democratically brought to power. So he's now is totally overturned his arguments from 11 years ago, and now unashamedly supporting autocrats in the region.
And he's also doing this currently as a peace envoy of the Middle East.
You know, if you made up the story, you couldn't make that up, could you? He's the permanent peace envoy to the Middle East. It's actually quite frightening.
Yeah. Well, look, if his concept of democracy turns out to be elastic, so does his definition of extremist, because he argued that we ought to be more deeply involved in the civil war and foreign intervention in Syria, which could only bring, by any standards, extremists into power in Damascus. And of course, the one country he didn't mention at all was Saudi Arabia, which is the font of almost all extremism.
It's astonishing because, I mean, any analysis of the rise of extremism over the last 20 years will always focus, the locus will always be Saudi Arabia, where a very intolerant brand of Islam has been promoted and exported in other parts of the world. The Saudi monarchy is perhaps the most reactionary monarchy in the entire world.
And the unfreest and the least democratic.
Absolutely. You know, they routinely, I mean, I was there to perform Hajj. I couldn't buy a copy of the Quran translated by Muhammad Asad, who was a Western European, and because it was regarded as not an accurate translation. So they routinely, too liberal, absolutely. So they routinely censor books. They routinely deny their population access to freedoms. And yet this is the one government that Tony Blair there's not a single word mentioned about. He mentioned lots of different governments in the region and his solution to bring greater freedoms to these countries. But Saudi Arabia, not a word. It's almost as if, as long as Saudi Arabia keeps spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year buying useless weaponry from the West, then it will be overlooked.
The reasons for him making the speech then, prophylactic reasons in advance of the Chilcot, though God knows when Chilcot is going to report, we can understand. Why did the British media give it such extraordinary prominence? It dominated the news agenda for fully 24, almost 48 hours.
Yes, it's true. I mean, it's regrettable that a speech from a man who's been so discredited can get that kind of publicity. Yeah. But in today's climate, where the government last year did try and make an attempt to galvanize the population, although it failed, into supporting attack on Syria, this is another attempt by Tony Blair down the same line to try and galvanize public opinion into rallying it behind great aggression in the Muslim world.
And so the establishment must kind of favour that view, or
Absolutely.
They wouldn't have given him the prominence.
Well, it's worth reflecting that at the time of the Iraq War, the British public was very heavily divided, you know, maybe 50-50 or 60-40, but the vast majority of the press did support Tony Blair's invasion of Iraq, and all the Murdoch press was almost unanimous in its support for Iraq. So the establishment was very much behind this intervention in Muslim countries.
You mentioned the climate, so let's dig deeper into the climate. This Trojan horse business, where the heinous crime is alleged that some Muslims were trying to get themselves elected to the board of school governors, in a country crying out for people to come forward to become school governors, and school governors don't have very much power or authority anyway. The government has sent in the former commander of the anti-terrorism squad to look into this plot. I mean, if that's not stirring up Islamophobia, I can't imagine what is.
It's worth bearing in mind here who our Education Secretary in Britain is. It is Michael Gove. And Michael Gove used to be chairman of Policy Exchange, which is a very neocon think tank here in the UK. It's very, very regrettable that Michael Gove chose I believe it's Detective Inspector Clark, exactly, the former anti-terrorist chief, to head this investigation.
Even the Chief Constable of the West Midlands said it was very, very regrettable.
It was, because it was seen as, by Muslims in Birmingham as trying to, again, vilify a legitimate pursuit, which is trying to get more Muslims engaged in the running of their schools. You would think where Muslims constitute the majority, and in many schools in Birmingham, in that area, Muslims do constitute the majority of the population in terms of pupils. You'd think the government would welcome greater involvement by their parents in the education of their own children. But here, I think Michael Gove and some right-wing commentators have hinted that there is a sinister plot, an Islamist plot, to try and take over these schools. But if there was, then we'd need to see the evidence. And up till now, the evidence hasn't really been forthcoming. We've seen an anonymous letter, which has not been really, we don't know who authored this.
It may all turn out to be a hoax.
It may well
My sources in Birmingham, which are many and well-placed, indicate that actually it's a forgery, it's a hoax. And of course, just along the road from here, Lutfur Rahman, we don't want to interfere in the electoral process, which has begun. We don't have a side, can't have, as a British television programme in this. But it was a remarkable barrage that the elected mayor came under, all at a very advantageous time, just before the elections kicked off. BBC, the state broadcaster in Britain, in its Panorama flagship, opened fire. No sooner had the closing credits disappeared off the screen, the communities minister had sent in the police, who a couple of days later said there was no case to answer. But nonetheless, the inspectors are still in and so on. This surely belongs as part of this picture that I'm trying to describe of Britain in the grip of an Islamophobic wave.
It is. It was, again, it was astonishing that Eric Pickles responded to what was a very inflammatory BBC documentary on Panorama by sending in the inspector so quickly. We know there's been bad blood between Lutfur Rahman and the Conservative Party. Lutfur Rahman used to be a member of the Labour Party, had to stand as an independent. And, you know, it has to be said, he was elected by a lot of substantial support. You don't just get elected as an independent MP just like that. You have to have some grassroots standing there. So it was an incredible campaign he ran several years ago. And to see the BBC intervening in what seemed to my eyes, a very, very party political way, was regrettable. But it was, remember, we have to bear in mind the reporter behind it, John Ware, is no stranger to controversial reporting on the BBC.
He is not. In fact, I made a complaint about him many years ago in a Saudi-related story, which was upheld, which was a rare experience for me. So summing up, what's life like for the 2 million Muslims in Britain today in this atmosphere?
British Muslims have been on the spotlight now for a number of years, and the events of 9/11 only exacerbated that spotlight. We've seen many right-wing commentators in the UK who are very extensively placed in our media, continually vilifying this community. We've seen the rise of an explicitly anti-Muslim movement in the shape of the English Defence League, targeting British Muslims. Our established far-right parties like the British National Party, make no bones, every time there is an election, their campaign is explicitly anti-Muslim. They see it as a way of winning votes. What's most depressing is that some of our mainstream parties, like the Conservative Party in Britain, have seen this as a vote winner as well. And rather than pushing back against this extremism, pushing back against this racism, they appear all too eager to jump on board the bashing Muslims bandwagon. That is really, really regrettable. And it's not just we in the UK who are seeing this. It's an established trend in Europe now as well, where we're seeing European parties, far-right parties and mainstream right-wing parties are seeking to rally votes on the back of anti-Muslim hysteria.
Inayat Bongawala, as always, I'm deeply grateful. Thanks for that. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, I asked the people whether Britain is in the grip of Islamophobia, to which Jack Tipple replies, it's been in the grip of Islamophobia since the West needed a new boogeyman at the fall of the Iron Curtain.
Well, that's true, but periodically it waxes and wanes, and it's definitely waxing right now, and that has to be connected to the European Parliament elections, the local elections, the xenophobia of UKIP and so on, and of course the general election just next year.
Chris Allen says that the government would like that to be the case, but most people I know have their own minds. About the speech that Blair made last week, RM makes the point that the one country Blair did not mention in his radical speech was Saudi Arabia. Wonder why?
Well, he didn't mention it, but he implicitly said that we should back it, which is a measure of just how perverse this speech was.
Yeah, you couldn't make it up. About India, Moss says that the election will be between the nepotistic Congress and the anti-non-Hindu BJP. AAP don't have hope in hell. And Tausif Khan says that both Congress and BJP serve the corporate interests and that we just have to choose between the lesser devil. That's all for this week.
Which unfortunately means that's the end of the show.
You can keep in touch with us on Twitter or RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook you can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.